Thank you everyone for joining us today for an extra special MD Advocacy webinar about FAA Reauthorization. We're so happy that us and all of us have worked together over the last many years to get this over the finish line. And we really want to take a couple minutes just to talk about what is in this law and how it will affect those who are living with a disability or those who are wheelchair users as they fly. So we're excited to welcome you to a very special webinar to talk all about this exciting accomplishment. My name is Mark Fisher. I'm the Director of Advocacy Engagement here at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and I'm excited to lead this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda today. It's a small agenda, but it's a powerful agenda. So first we'll back up and talk a little bit about what is FAA reauthorization? What was this whole process we went through and why was it important? And then we'll do a deep dive about what actually passed Congress. What are these reforms that passed Congress and how will they actually affect people living with disabilities fly easier? And then where do we go from here? What are the next steps? I'm lucky to be joined by an all-star panel to walk us through all of this. First, we'll be joined by Shannon Wood. She is MDA's Director of Disability Policy. She'll talk about the reforms that were included in the law that just passed that the president signed. We're also lucky to be joined by Mindy Henderson. She is the Vice President of Disability Outreach and Empowerment here at MDA, and she's also the Editor-in-Chief of MDA Quest Media, and she'll talk about the real-life impacts of how these reforms will affect the community. And again, my name is Mark Fisher, and I'll help lead this conversation. So let's get right into it. I want to invite Shannon to talk a little bit about what is FAA authorization? What have we been working on for the last over many years and talk a little bit about the law. So Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Wood, and I'm the Director of Disability Policy here at MDA. And as Mark mentioned, during this portion of the webinar, I'll cover what made its way into the final enacted FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024, which was signed into law by President Biden in early May and included many of the accessibility provisions that MDA advocates had been advocating for. They held in-person meetings with members of Congress, sent thousands of messages, and really rallied to make this possible. So let's talk about why this bill is important and what the new law does. Next slide. So to level set for a second, as an organization, air travel accessibility through the FAA reauthorization process has been a major campaign of MDA's advocacy department, given our mission to empower the people we serve to live longer, more independent lives. For far too long, people with disabilities, including those from the neuromuscular community, have endured injuries, damaged devices, inadequately trained staff, and indignity through the air travel experience, which really underscores the overdue need to make air travel more accessible. The Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, is up for reauthorization every 5 years. It extends the agency's funding and authority. The reauthorization process is really important for advocates because it provides an opportunity to advocate for the critical priorities of flyers with disabilities, because Congress can propose significant changes and address barriers to air travel. One of the vehicles to do that is through the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act, which has traditionally been used by disability advocates for accessibility priorities in air travel. This year, we successfully passed a 5-year FAA reauthorization that included many of the accessibility provisions we had advocated for in the ACAA. This is a tremendous accomplishment, marking one of the most substantial progress in air travel accessibility in nearly 40 years. So let's talk about what's in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 and what it changes for people living with disabilities, including those in the neuromuscular community. Next slide. All right, let's dive into what made it into that bipartisan bicameral compromise. There is a whole section of the 1,000+ page bill text on accessibility, so there's a lot to cover here. But starting first with improved training standards for assisting passengers who use wheelchairs and the improved training standards for those stowing wheelchairs. There will be mandatory training standards required for airline personnel and contractors who assist passengers who use wheelchairs, who board a plane using an aisle chair or other boarding device. Before being allowed to assist passengers, personnel must successfully demonstrate during hands-on training sessions how to safely use an aisle chair, how to safely use straps, brakes, and other safety features, how to assist in the transfer of passengers to and from their wheelchair, the aisle chair, and the seat, either by physically lifting the passenger or using a device to lift or transfer. And also, really importantly, how to effectively communicate with and take instruction from the passenger with a disability. Personnel must also be trained on the availability of accessible lavatories and onboard wheelchairs, and the right of a person with a disability to request an onboard wheelchair. Refresher training required within 18 months of initial training, and recertifications required every 18 months will ensure competency in this area. Mindy, anything you'd like to share around these improved training standards and what it means for flyers with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to throw out there initially that I actually did not fly for 14 or 15 years because of all of the risks and things to travelers with disabilities. And over the past year, I've had the opportunity, really as an advocate, to alongside MDA, fly around the country and do work, a lot of which was relevant to the passing of this new bill. And so for that reason, I'm going to say that in my opinion, this is really one of the most important items, in my opinion, that was passed in this FAA reauthorization. Seat transfers and the way that our mobility devices are handled represents a huge part of the problem currently, and where so much of that loss of dignity, the injuries, and significant damage to wheelchairs and other devices happen. And I have actually, over the past year, have been able to see training practices put into place. And I can honestly say that short of having wheelchair spots on on airplanes, which I know what everybody wants, it's helped to create really, I think, the next best travel experience. When I've interacted with crews and personnel that have been received more advanced, more effective training, I've felt listened to, heard, and those are the times when the crews have really been better trained. And specifically when I've been able to travel without injury, I've had a few instances over the past year where during seat transfers, because of lack of training, I've sprained ankles or things of that nature. And I really believe that this is going to create a night and day experience for a lot of travelers.
Thanks, Mindy. And those are the exact sort of injuries that we're trying to prevent with these enhanced training standards, and really important that it was included in this final bill. Also in the bill is improving DOT's complaint process. The law requires the Secretary of Transportation to investigate all complaints no later than 120 days after it has been submitted, and they must provide in writing whether the carrier violated the Air Carrier Access Act or a regulation. They must also include the facts underlying the complaint and any action that they're taking in response to the incident. This is a big improvement from before, which is that DOT did not have a deadline for responding to complaints. Mindy, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again how critical and important I think this piece of the new bill is. It's going to really add an extra level of accountability that doesn't currently exist. And I think it's that lack of accountability that's allowed the problem to go on for so long. And this is a great step. And it's going to be important that as we all work together in the next 5 years and work toward even bigger improvements in air travel, that we all continue to file complaints when it's warranted. And if we experience things that aren't in keeping with this new legislation, because if we don't file our complaints, there will be nothing for the DOT to investigate. So, that's how they will know how severe the problem still is. And honestly, it's what's going to, I think, incentivize carriers to make improvements so that they can avoid complaints and consequences to poorly handled air travel for people with disabilities.
Absolutely. Moving on to access standards and study into wheelchairs in cabins. So also within the law, there is required rulemaking regarding standards to ensure that the boarding and deplaning process is accessible. This is in terms of design for, transportation of, and communication with individuals with disabilities, including those who use wheelchairs. The standards will apply to boarding and deplaning equipment and improve procedures to ensure cabin stowage for manual assistive devices and improved cargo hold storage to prevent damage to wheelchairs and devices. Very excitingly, there is also required negotiated rulemaking on implementing seating arrangements that accommodate individuals with disabilities using wheelchairs, including power wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, and scooters in the main cabin during the flight, which is something that has been long wished for by the neuromuscular community. Right, Mindy?
100%. Again, I feel like each of these I'm saying, this is so important. And it really is, this, I'm going to focus on deplaning for just a second, because that's, wrapped up into everything that you just talked about, Shannon. And I can't stress enough, when you've just been on a 4-hour flight, separated from your wheelchair and waiting for all of the other, I don't know, 300 or so passengers to exit the plane before someone can even think about getting you out of your seat and back into your own mobility device where you can be comfortable again. I know that a lot of people watching have probably felt that pain, and it's not just uncomfortable to be in an airplane seat, but potentially dangerous and injury inducing as well. So then to have to wait another 30 or 45 minutes after the plane has landed to be able to get safely back into your own wheelchair when you're uncomfortable can be excruciating. And I've seen, again, both extremes of this situation. I have personally been the cause of a 45-minute, I don't mean to brag, but I have caused a 45-minute delay to the next flight because my wheelchair was sent to the wrong place after it was taken off the airplane and there was nowhere for me to go. And conversely, I've also seen this work really, really well, where my wheelchair was one of the first things off the airplane and was brought up to the plane, so that as soon as the last person stepped off the airplane, people were waiting with the aisle chair and ready to help me get quickly off the plane and get comfortable again. So I am super thrilled at this section of the legislation as well.
Thanks, Mindy, for sharing your experiences, and hopefully with this most recent FAA reauthorization, there's less variability in passengers' experiences around this, so thank you. Moving on to improved website applications and kiosk accessibility. There is a section of the law related to equal accessibility to passenger portals. No later than 2 years after enactment, the Department of Transportation must issue regulations setting forth minimum standards to ensure that individuals with disabilities are able to access customer-focused kiosks, software applications, and websites of air carriers and airports equal to those who do not have disabilities. The standards must be consistent with those in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA of the Web Accessibility Initiative. The ACAA Advisory Committee will periodically review and make recommendations regarding website and kiosk accessibility. And again, that advisory committee includes people with disabilities. DOT is required to revisit this section of the law every 5 years to update the regulations as needed. So this is a big step forward for accessibility. Last, improved access to seating accommodations. Another section of the bill requires the Secretary to issue rulemaking regarding seating accommodations for any qualified individual with a disability within 180 days of enactment. In carrying out the rulemaking, the Department must consider the scope and anticipated number of people who may need to be seated with a companion to receive assistance during a flight, or should be afforded bulkhead seats. In essence, that first row behind first class, there's a wall in front of them, there's a bit more leg room. Usually it's a bit closer to the lavatory or other seating considerations beyond bulkhead seats. They must also look at the types of disabilities that may need seating accommodations and whether they have difficulty obtaining appropriate seating accommodations currently. Next slide. But wait, there's more. I told you there was a lot of great accessibility information in this bill. So Moving on to required continued study on airline reported mishandled wheelchair data, and this is huge. The department is required no later than 12 months from enactment to evaluate data on the type and frequency of mishandled wheelchairs on aircraft, with that data delineated by A, the types of wheelchairs involved in such incidents, and B, the ways in which wheelchairs are mishandled, including the type of damage to wheelchairs, whether it's broken drive wheels or casters, bent or broken frames, damage to wiring, control input devices, joysticks, the upholstery, you name it. And they have to also determine the trends that they're seeing in that data. That data is to be made available on a public website of the Department of Transportation in an accessible manner and will also be reported to Congress. Mindy, do you have anything to share on the continued study on airline reported mishandled wheelchair data?
Yeah, again, so happy to see this piece. And this is that accountability piece again, right? Because seeing this kind of analysis, and I think what we all know are incredibly high numbers of incidents, I think is going to be sobering for a lot of people. And it'll help to quantify the problem even more than it's already been and create, I think, more urgency around continued improvements in compliance. And my personal hope, which is, of course, creating more and more urgency around creating those desired wheelchair spots on airplanes.
Yep, that is definitely MDA's vision. Also within the new law is the reauthorization of the Air Carrier Access Act Advisory Committee and codification of the Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights, and this is pretty big. The bill extends the ACAA Advisory Committee to 2028, which, as I may have mentioned before, is essentially the advisory committee for the needs of passengers with disabilities. And again, codified into law is that Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights, which is huge. Also within the bill is a pilot grant program to increase airport accessibility. The law requires the Department of Transportation to establish and carry out a pilot program to award grants to carry out capital projects to upgrade airport accessibility of commercial service airports for people with disabilities. They can do this by increasing the number of airports, terminals, or airport facilities that meet or exceed the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Mindy, anything you'd like to share about increasing airport accessibility?
Just that anytime anyone is talking about making anything more accessible, I am a happy camper. There are definite improvements to certain airports across the country that can benefit from some extra love and attention in the accessibility department. So I'm excited to see this one unfold.
Me too. Also, under the new law are new requirements for onboard wheelchair availability. Under the new FAA reauthorization, if an individual informs a carrier at booking that they require the use of a wheelchair, the carrier must provide information regarding the provision and use of onboard wheelchairs, including the rights and responsibilities of the air carrier and the passenger. Also within the bill is expansion of the Advanced Materials Centers of Excellence. The Advanced Materials Center of Excellence is required to conduct research and development into aircraft structure crashworthiness and passenger safety, as well as address safe and accessible air travel for individuals with a disability, including those materials that are needed to facilitate safe wheelchair restraint systems. Mindy, I know you've talked a lot about this being really the vision of accessible air travel for people living with a neuromuscular disease. So anything you'd like to share about this?
Yeah, I think this is the piece of the legislation that's really contributing to a very tangible pathway and timeline for accomplishing, hopefully, the requirement of having wheelchair spots on airplanes. And again, that's the ultimate goal. It's MDA's vision, it's my vision, and it's the majority of what people tend to ask me about when I've talked about the FAA reauthorization and other things that are going on in terms of advocacy for accessible air travel. Everyone wants to know when those spots will be available. And I think that that's what this one is very directly leading up to, which is exciting.
Exciting. It's one of my favorite pieces too.
Mm.
Last but not least, the law also provides for a pilot program for known service animals to be exempt from documentation requirements. This is really big. We've heard from advocates that forms and the process for service animals to fly is cumbersome. DOT under the new law is required to work with disability organizations as they establish this known service animal program, ensuring that people with disabilities have an active role in developing the program. Mindy, anything you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, this is important, not only because of the importance of service animals to people with disabilities, but you've mentioned this, Shannon, and one or two other things where this is a very specific sort of nothing for us without us kind of policy. And there are certainly good-hearted people out there who want to do the right thing, but if you don't involve people with disabilities in making the rules and architecting the programs for the disability community, there's really no way to be sure that you're hitting the mark or that things are going to work as designed when they're rolled out. So I'm excited about the language in this area of the legislation about including people with disabilities, and a couple of other places where that's giving us a seat at the table, essentially.
Just so important, and MDA will certainly make advocates aware of opportunities to engage in the implementation process and help inform a lot of the programs included in this new law. Next slide. So now that we've covered what's in the bill, I just wanted to share where we go from here. We know that our work on air travel accessibility does not end here. And currently, right now, as we share this, the Department of Transportation has a proposed rollout for public comment aimed at making air travel more accessible for flyers who use wheelchairs, scooters, or other mobility devices. The rule does many different things of importance to the neuromuscular community, including additional penalties and remedies for airlines that mishandle wheelchairs or devices, safe, dignified, prompt assistance for people who use wheelchairs or mobility devices, and improved accessibility standards on planes. We are hopeful for a quick finalization of the rule to include some of the proposed changes that we've advocated for. MDA will be submitting organizational comments, which will be posted to our Action Center, and we encourage folks living with disabilities to share their flying experiences with the DOT prior to the deadline of June 12th. For more information on how you can do so, visit our Action Center through the link you see on the slide. Mindy, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just love to add some additional urgency to what you said. There's not a ton of time left to submit comments, but I truly hope that anyone who's listening to this before June 12th, who has an air travel story to share with the government and the Department of Transportation, examples of when and how the process is broken down, what the consequences of that were to you, will do that. It's such a great opportunity to use your voice and contribute to the change that's happening and the change that's still needed, frankly. And if the powers that be don't hear from us about what's wrong and what's broken and how it affects our daily lives, then they don't know what to fix. So there is serious power in numbers as well. So the more people they hear from, reinforcing what our community needs, the more likely we are to see significant change.
True, Mindy. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mark.
Great. Thank you both, Shannon. Thank you, Mindy, for walking through this truly impressive law. This has lots of different parts that I know will make a difference for people living with disabilities as this gets implemented over the next few years. So thank you both for walking through it. It's a lot, but it's a good a lot. I'd rather have a lot to talk about than not a lot. So it's great that you're able to walk through that. So thank you. And also a big thank you to folks who are listening who have been advocating for us for over the years on this. Many of you started just a year after the last FAA authorization. Many of you started advocating with us on this since 2019. And for those who stuck with us through that time, or maybe we've got along the way, or maybe came to us just this year, every one of you have made a difference. All your voices have made a difference, which is why we saw the bill be as strong as it was. But as both Shannon and Mindy said, we have a ways to go. We know that we have more work to do to make sure this is implemented correctly, and that we work to get those wheelchair spots on planes, which we know is the ultimate goal. So thank you for those who've advocated with us. If you haven't yet, please go to mda.org/advocacy and join us today. The more of us speaking up, the better. And hopefully, as we talk throughout the years, we'll talk about even more reforms that we'll get in the next few years, or how these have been implemented, and we can see real life results, because I know we will. So thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, everyone who's joined us today. We truly appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.